שיר המעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה. השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך. השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, שא עיני אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי. עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ. אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל. השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה. השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך. השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם.
Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. All right, let's get rid of this. 1 second here. One second. Let me get rid of these banners here. That goes bye-bye. That goes up like that. That goes like so. And 1 second here. Why is it not doing my virtual background? That's weird. Okay, no big. Let's go like this. Oh, 1 second, please. Virtual background, this. Okay, this. I don't know why it's this. That's weird. There we go. There's the virtual background. Okay, so welcome to the Torah study. Welcome to this week's World Alliance of Qara'im Torah study. 1 second, please. Some technical difficulties as usual. Okay, I am Hakham Melech ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im. And we are going to be studying Leviticus chapter 21. We'll finish off 20 very briefly. Shabbat Shalom, Marianana Miknana, Shabbat Shalom. We'll finish off chapter 20 briefly, and then we'll move on to chapter 21. 1 second, please. No, Shoshi boy. No. Cat wants to come in. It'll drive me crazy. So that's what we're going to do. Welcome to the Torah study. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I really need a sound and video engineer. If you'd like to move to Katsrin and become my sound and video engineer, not mine, the World Alliance of Qara'im official sound and video engineer, you can put on your resume, then please do. Talking about that, as you all know, I live in Katsrin now in the Golan Heights in Israel. Let's see, where's this cat? Nope. Shoshi boy, no. I live in Katsuri now in the Golan Heights in Israel, and I'm very, very happy here. It's a great place. Shalom, Richard Michael. Oh, oh God. Okay. I thought I knew who that was, but no, I guess not. Thought it was an old friend of mine. I live here in Katsuri in the Golan Heights right now, and I'm very, very happy about that. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, and we want to start a Karaite community here. And I won't say in the meantime, I found a very nice, mostly English-speaking community. I do speak fluent Hebrew, but it's nice to be around English speakers as well. And I found a very, very nice English-speaking community here in Kathleen, and I go to the synagogue. It's a rabbinical synagogue. And yes, there are certain things in rabbinical synagogues which really irk me. I will do some short videos on the World Alliance of Qara'im YouTube channel about some of those things. I think in a little while. I could say some of them. There are certain things which I really find, I would say, inappropriate, disturbing in a rabbinical synagogue. And I want to say, first of all, that in no way, shape, or form means that I don't enjoy. I love going to this rabbinical synagogue that I'm going to. The people are super nice, and I don't blame them for any of these things. They are tinokot shenishba'u. You can look that up. Basically means a baby that was kidnapped. It's kind of an idea of a baby being kidnapped when he was very young, and they don't know any better. They know not what they do. They're too they're too brainwashed to know what they do. And it's ironic because over the years and over decades, whenever someone wants to insult me and say, "Oh, you're the reason you're a Karaite, and the reason you don't accept the Talmud, and the reason you don't accept rabbinical Judaism," it's not that you're an apikoros. It's not that you're a heretic or a rebel. You're too dumb to be a heretic or a rebel. You're just a tinok shenishba. You're just like a little baby that was kidnapped when he was like you have the intelligence of a little baby. He doesn't know what he's doing any better. And I always find that ironic, because the truth of the matter is, it's the Rabbinites, it's the rabbinical Jews that are the Tinokot Shenishba'u. They've been hijacked by this bizarre, Zoroastrian / Greek / Roman / other pagan movement 2,000 plus years ago, and they don't even realize it. It became normative Judaism so much to the point that they don't even realize what a bizarre and distorted form of derivative of Torah is. Can I call it Torah? I guess kind of call it Torah. Derivative religion of Torah is. So the irony there is that for decades I've always been called the Tinok Shenishba. We don't take you seriously, Melech. You're so dumb. You just don't know it better. Why don't you learn some more Talmud? Why don't you learn some more Gemara? Then you'll understand. You'll see the light, right? But as I said, the reality is just the opposite. That they're tinokot shenishbu. So let me talk about very briefly. This wasn't the topic I was planning to talk about, and then we'll get into the topics that I want to talk about. But some of the things that I find really disturbing in a rabbinical synagogue, and I don't take place in them. I don't take part in them, and I'm not talking about putting on tefillin. That obviously is something that as Karaites we don't do, and of course believe that tefillin is basically inspired, or is the pagan amulet that has been adopted again by Jews when they were influenced by these pagan religions, by these pagan cultures. But on Shabbat, the Rabbinites don't put on tefillin anyway, so that's one of the reasons that I go on Shabbat, and it'd be very difficult for me to go on a weekday prayer service in the morning, because they would put on tefillin, and I would absolutely refuse to put on tefillin, and it would cause a whole scene, and I don't want to do that. That's not my thing. But at any rate, so there are certain things on Shabbat, just on the Shabbat services, which I find very disturbing. The first of all is not only on Shabbat, but when I go on Shabbat, I find it disturbing. First of all is all the prayers in Aramaic. So there are a lot of prayers in Aramaic. I suppose the most Shabbat Shalom, Adrian. I suppose the most prominent one is the Kaddish, which is said throughout the prayer services. If you've ever been to any kind of rabbinical prayer service and you've heard it, Yitgadal v'Yikadash Shemei Rabba, etc. Right, and that's in Aramaic. Now, Aramaic is the language of the surrounding nations, the ancient surrounding nations, or really at the time, why did it work its way into rabbinical Judaism? Because at the time when rabbinical Judaism was forming, that was the lingua franca, one of the lingua francas of the region, the other being Greek. And so it made its way. But Aramaic is not our language. It's the language of the surrounding nations and even of some of our ancient enemies. And it has no place, no a place a in a Jewish Jewish prayer service, in an Israelite prayer service. Of course, people say, "Well, Aramaic appears." What do you mean Aramaic appears in the Tanakh? For instance, in the book of Daniel, part of it is in Aramaic, but Daniel was writing in the exile. Daniel was in exile when he was writing it, so he was writing because that was the language they were speaking. Now that we've come back to the land of Israel, there is absolutely no reason for us to continue to speak the language of these foreign nations, even though Aramaic is very close to Hebrew. So are other languages close to Hebrew, right? There are other languages that are close to Hebrew, and Phoenician, Ugaritic, and others. But it's not our language. Our language is Hebrew, and it really irks me, disturbs me when I hear any of the prayers. And there are a bunch of prayers in Aramaic throughout the prayer service. Another thing that really disturbs me is the when they bring around the Torah scroll, they'll bow down to it and then touch it either with their hands or with the tzitzit or with the talit, their big tzitzit, their prayer shawl, and then they'll kiss it. And to me, this is like bowing down to an idol. It doesn't matter that it's the Torah. The Torah is not the creator. The Torah is not Yahweh. The Torah is a creation of Yahweh. And I would go so far, Shabbat Shalom, and I would go so far as to say that this is one of the problems of the rabbinites, that they treat the Torah, almost the written, I won't even say the written Torah, they treat the Torah as if it's a god, and they worship it in the sense that they've taken it, turned it into a god, and that's why their focus is on dealing with it. Yes, they've distorted it, but that's their focus. Now, there's another religion. I know this, the Sikh religion. Okay, they don't worship, or they don't claim to worship, but I've been to Sikh temples before, back in New York, and uh, and the the centerpiece of a Sikh temple is a book. So a Sikh temple is called the Gurdwara, and the book that is always at the center, let's see if I can find it here. And Gurdwara, literally door of the guru, is a place of assembly and worship for Sikhs, but its normal meaning is a place of guru or home of guru. So they don't worship, they venerate this guru. I think it's the 11th guru, if I remember correctly, and it's a book. It's basically a book. Let's see. Each Gurdwara has a Darbar Sahib, where the Guru Granth Sahib. So, what is the Guru Granth Sahib? This is the book that they worship. Okay, the Guru Granth Sahib is the central holy religious scripture of Sikhism, regarded by the Sikhs as the final sovereign and eternal guru, following the lineage of the 10 human gurus of the religion. So it's the 11th guru, and it's a book called the Guru Granth Sahib. And if you ever go to a Sikh temple, check it out. It's interesting. Then you'll see that basically at the center is this book that they claim they don't worship, but at the very least they venerate. And this is exactly what we see in the rabbinical Shabbat Shalom, Paul. It's exactly what we see in the rabbinical synagogues. The Torah scroll is venerated. It's brought around. It's kissed. Everyone stands up when it's brought out. It's taken out of an ark, right? What was in the ark in ancient times was the two tablets, the tablets of the covenant, but nobody went and worshipped the ark. Or if anyone did worship the ark, it wasn't because of the tablets of the covenant in the ark. It was because of the kavod Yahweh, the glory of Yahweh, that dwelled on top of the ark between the two cherubim. So I find this very problematic, and not to mention all of the other things there, which I won't go into right now, which I also find problematic as well. But those are some examples. Okay, Number one, all of the prayers in Aramaic, which are foreign. Aramaic is a foreign language. It is the language of some of our ancient enemies. And the veneration or the almost worship of the Torah, which one could say is exactly what made the rabbis venerate it as a false idol, as a false god. And then once they venerated it as a false god, they did all kinds of bizarre things to it, like come up with their bizarre form of Judaism known as rabbinical Judaism. Okay, so enough of that. Let's talk about some of the things that I wanted to talk about today. So we're going to revisit this topic of the Skenim. And let's just review. We spoke about what the Sanhedrin was historically. Let's go to our favorite rabbi, Rabbi Wikipedia. He's the only rabbi that I really follow. And let's see here. And let's just review what we learned about historically about the Sanhedrin a little bit. Okay. So let's see. Should I share the screen? When we do the actual study, I'll share it. So the Sanhedrin is a loan word from Koine or Common Greek. We read sitting together in assembly. There were two classes of rabbinate courts called Sanhedrins, the greater and lesser, and this was much later. Lesser Sanhedrin of 23 judges. So we read all this last week, so I don't want to. We'll go through it again because it's good to sometimes repeat things. It helps it get in the head. A lesser Sanhedrin of 23 judges was appointed to sit as a tribunal in each city. This is when the rabbis ruled the show, when the Pharisees ruled the show. There was only one great Sanhedrin of 71 judges, which, among other roles, acted as a Supreme Court, taking appeals from cases that lesser courts decided. In general usage, the Sanhedrin, without qualifier, usually refers to the Great Sanhedrin, which was provided over by the Nasi. Let me share this actually. It'll make it a little bit easier. Why did that not work? There we go. Et cetera, et cetera. Okay, in the Second Temple period, the Great Sanhedrin met in the Temple of Jerusalem, and by the way, not in all the Second Temple period, in the later Second Temple period, in a building called the Hall of Hewn Stones. After the destruction of the Second Temple and the failure of the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Great Sanhedrin moved to the Galilee, which is not far from where I am right now, on the Golan Heights, which became part of the Roman province of Syria, Palestina. In this period, the Sanhedrin was sometimes called the Galilean Patriarchate or Patriarchate of Palestina, the governing legal body of Galilean Jewry. So that was after the destruction of the Second Temple, which occurred in 70 CE. In the late 200 CE, to avoid persecution, the name Sanhedrin was dropped, and its decisions were issued under the name Beit Midrash, House of Learning. The last universally binding decision of the Great Sanhedrin appeared in 358 when the Hebrew calendar, which we've spoken about extensively, was established. The Great Sanhedrin was finally disbanded in 425. And there are a lot of rabbis and rabbinical Jews who want to reconvene this Sanhedrin, or they want to reconstitute a Sanhedrin so they can start changing the laws. There have been a number of attempts over the past couple of decades. All of them have not really been successful. None of them have really been successful. And such as we see here. Over the centuries, attempts have been made to revive the institutions such as the Grand Sanhedrin convened by Napoleon Bonaparte and modern attempts in Israel. In the Hebrew Bible, Moses and the Israelites were commanded by God to establish courts of justice, of judges. They were also commanded to establish a Supreme Court located at the central sanctuary after arriving in the land of Israel to handle cases too difficult for local court. So the first thing to point out here is that we saw that there was a Great Sanhedrin of 71 members, and that was sat in the Lishchat Gazit. It basically sat on the Temple Mount in the temple during Second Temple period times, and then there was a Sanhedrin of 23 in the local cities and the cities around around Israel. But that's not the concept in the Torah. In the Torah, it's not. So they decided by majority, both the lesser Sanhedrin and the greater Sanhedrin. That's why there are 71 people in the great Sanhedrin, right? Because if you have 70, really the intention was to make it 70. And by the way, it was not elders. There were some younger people and there were some older people. If I remember, it was his name is Ben Zoma, was very, very young, and his beard miraculously turned white overnight, even though he was young. There's a story in the Talmud. Don't ask me where. I'd have to go look it up about that. But at any rate, they called them 71 elders. But why 71 elders? Because we have a couple of cases in the Tanakh in the Torah that we reviewed last week, and we're going to talk to the elders again, where 70 elders were appointed by Moses. So we have, I believe it's in Exodus 24, where 70 of the elders go up to Mount Sinai. They don't go all the way up with Moses, but they go basically up near the top. And then we have later in Numbers, I'd have to look it up again exactly where, the children of Israel clamor for meat, and Yahweh brings them slav. How do you say slav again in English? What is the word? Slav in English. It's God, I have the picture of the bird in my head, but I forgot the name in English. Quail. So sends them quail, and then Moses basically is fed up with the Israelites and said, "I've had enough, and I cannot bear all these people on my own." And then Yahweh says, "No problem. Take 70 of the elders and place your head on them, and pass some of your spirit onto them." And they begin prophesying. And so the 70 elders shared the burden with Moses after this incident. So when the Sanhedrin was set up by the Jews later on, and we'll see that they weren't originally set up, the Sanhedrin was not originally set up by the Jews. This is really later on in the Second Temple period that they modeled the Great Sanhedrin after the 70 elders that are mentioned in the Torah, but they couldn't make it 70 because they decided by majority, and so they had to make it an odd number. So they added one, and that's the way it became 71. Okay. And also there's an explanation for the 23, which we won't go into right now. We spoke about it last week. So so then there's this idea that, and there's this rabbi, I'll talk more about it, that I might be debating over the next couple of weeks sometime. And so his whole big thing is that the Sanhedrin has authority, or had authority, because they constitute this body of 70 elders, just as in the case of Torah, in the cases in the Torah where Moses chose 70 elders for these various roles or these various tasks. And we'll talk a bit about that more. But one big difference is that it's true that Moses did choose 70 elders to help rule, or to help rule over the nation. But that's not where they did not constitute the hierarchy of judges, because we see already earlier in Exodus chapter, is it 19, I believe, with the story of Jethro, where Jethro comes along and he basically advises Moses to make a hierarchy of judges. But that hierarchy of judges is exactly that. It's a hierarchy. It's not a body of judges that sits together and judges by majority. There was no concept whatsoever, as far as I can see, anywhere in the Tanakh, of deciding cases by majority rule of a body of elders. Yes, the elders were assistants, the judges were assistants, the rulers over thousands, over hundreds, over 50s, over 10s were all assistants to Moses, but it was a hierarchical system. And really what it was is a single judge in each case deciding the case, not a body of judges deciding by majority. So that's one big difference that we have to keep in mind. There was no sense of rule or of court decisions by majority anywhere in the Torah. Not that I can see. Maybe I'm forgetting something. If someone could prove me wrong or show me where there is, I'd be happy to see it. But there it's not. Okay? That's why in the period of judges, you have individual judges. Samson was an individual judge. Samuel was an individual judge. Othniel, Joshua, these were all individual judges. Moses was an individual judge, right? Yes, there were judges under him, but there weren't judges. He didn't sit in a body and then make decisions by majority. Okay, there was no concept of democracy, and when I mean democracy, I mean rule by majority, or just that's maybe democracy is not the right word. There was no concept of taking a vote to make decisions. There was a certain judge, and that judge made the decision. If it was the judge that ruled over Israel, and he was like the Supreme Court ruling, then we have Deuteronomy chapter 17. It says that when that judge or the Levite who sits in the place that God shall cause his name to be placed makes a decision, you cannot deviate to the left or the right on pain of death. And then you had the lesser judges that if they can't solve the case, then it moved up. It was appealed, or the case moved up to the Supreme Court in Jerusalem, just as we saw that Jethro advised Moses in Exodus chapter 19. Okay, so there's no so that's one big difference when people, or when rabbinites try to say that the Sanhedrin is a reconstitution or is a recapitulation of, I think I'm using that word correctly, of the 70 elders spoken about in the Torah a number of times. And by the way, each time that's spoken about, it doesn't mean that there were only 70 elders. In both cases that I mentioned, in Exodus chapter 24 and in the case of the after the quail, when Moses places his or God moves some of the dirt from Moses onto the elders, it says 70 of the elders, a body or a subset of 70 elders were chosen out of all the elders. So it's not like there were 70 elders throughout Israel that constituted one specific body. No, there were 70 elders sometimes that were chosen out of all the elders of Israel. Just as in any traditional society, you're going to have the elders are going to have, there'll be a council of elders, or there'll be elders that sit and make decisions. So maybe they met as a council, but they didn't. There's no indication anywhere in the Torah that they made decisions by majority, none whatsoever. Okay. However, in the Sanhedrin, they did make decision by majority. Let's move on a little bit here. So after destruction of the second temple, so we read that already. So in the Hebrew Bible, Moses and the Israelites were commanded by God to establish courts of judges. They were also commanded to establish a Supreme Court located in the central sanctuary. That's Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 9. And this is true, but as we mentioned, there's no indication in establishing these judges that there was a panel of judges that made decisions. Okay. Let's move on and read here. When Moses declared that the task of leading the people was too difficult for him, God made him appoint 70 elders, Cohanim, to share the burden of leadership with him. And that's in Numbers 11:16. We read through that last week, and that's what I just mentioned. So according to the Mishnah, these 70 elders plus Moses himself are the source for the 71 judges of the great Sanhedrin. That's in Mishnah Sanhedrin 1:6. Okay. So there we go. That's the little bait and switch that the rabbis did. They convened a panel of 71, and they said, yeah, this is what they're always trying to do, right? They're always trying to hearken back to Moses. They're always harking back to ancient times. That's why they call their bizarre interpretations of the Torah the oral law. And if you'll notice, whenever I write or whenever I speak, I'll never call the oral law, the rabbinical oral law. I'll never call it the oral law. I'll call it the so-called oral law. And when I write, I'll always put it in double quotes, and sometimes I'll even add the words before it's so-called. Okay, it's not an oral law, but what it is it's a bunch of distorted interpretations of the Torah, Greek, Zoroastrian, Babylonian, Greek, and Roman influenced distortions of the Torah, because those were the surrounding nations at the time that rabbinical Judaism became influential and became powerful. And so they came up with this, this bizarre, distorted interpretations of the Torah. But why do they call it an oral law? This is rabbinical propaganda. This is rabbinical sales talk. they call it an oral law because for a very simple reason, because there's no evidence of it written down. When the rabbis say that we don't have that we the reason that their so-called oral law is called an oral law is because it wasn't written down; it was passed from generation to generation. This is an absolute lie. And I always say to rabbis and rabbinites, if I'm debating them, arguing with them, I'll say this is a bunch of baloney. We have a book called the Tanakh, which in most printings is about 1,000 pages long, which goes into great detail, incredible detail, from the time of. We'll start with Moses. Really goes before that, obviously, but from the time of the giving of the Torah in Exodus chapter 20 through the very end of the last book, Second Chronicles. Well, if you want to put it in chronological order, then Ezra and Nehemiah covers a period of about, let's see, 1400 BCE is when they say Moses ruled over Israel until about 586. So we'll say 600 BCE. So we're talking about a period of about 586 BCE is the destruction of the date of destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians. And then 70 years later, the Jews returned. So we're talking about a period of roughly 1,000 years. Okay, the Tanakh covers, okay, we'll say a period of about 900 years. Okay, so we have in great detail, we have immense evidence for how the Israelites lived during those 900 years. So it's an absolute lie when the rabbis say, well, there's no evidence for our quote unquote oral law because it was passed down orally. Baloney. There would be some evidence somewhere in the Tanakh somewhere. And not only do we just have the Tanakh, let's keep in mind, okay? We have other things as well. We have biblical archaeology, which has made immense progress over the past couple of decades. And hold on one second. Cat. Oh, shalom, Zev, mashallah. Yofi, yofi. So we have biblical archaeology, which has made immense progress over the past couple of decades and really over the past 100 or 150 years since it became, or since Israel began to be resettled by the Jewish people. And biblical archaeology tells us tons of things about how the ancient Israelites lived in the land of Israel. A lot of evidence. In fact, I did a video last week when I was in Jerusalem, when I was in Yerushalayim, where we visited the Ketef Hinnom. You can look at the video. It's on the World Alliance of Qara'im YouTube channel, where we visited Ketef Hinnom, which is above the Valley of the Sons of Hinnom, mentioned in a number of places in the Tanakh. I believe Jeremiah 17, if I remember correctly, and a couple of other places. At any rate, the oldest verse ever found from the Torah was found there in Ketef Hinnom. It's called the Silver Scrolls. And then I did another short video. We visited the Israel Museum. I think it was the next day, and saw the actual Silver Scrolls because they were not left. They were found at Ketef Hinnom, but they were not left there. They were brought there now in the Israel Museum, and we saw those as well. And this dates back to, if I remember correctly, they dated back to the 7th century BCE or the 8th century BCE. So that's just one example, and that's an actual verses from the Torah, the priestly blessing. So that's just one example of many examples of how biblical archaeology has shed light on the way the ancient Israelites lived. And outside of biblical archaeology, we have Near Eastern archaeology, Middle Eastern archaeology, which also sheds a lot of light on how people in the general area lived, not just how the Israelites lived, not just how the children of Israel lived, but all of the surrounding nations. Okay, so when the rabbis come along and say that, there's no evidence, or that the oral law was passed down from generation to generation, and that's why there's no evidence of it, there's no written evidence of it, you can come back with them and say that's a bunch of baloney. We have an entire Tanakh. We don't only have a Tanakh, we also have, after the Tanakh, we have the Apocrypha, which covers some of the period. And yes, it also gets into the rabbinical period. So in parts of the Apocrypha, you're going to see some rabbinical like laws and ways of living. But that comes a little bit that comes in a later period. 1 second, please. Just give me 1 second here. Let me just do one thing here. Okay, so I'm back. Right. So when the rabbis come along and say that the oral law, they don't have evidence for the oral law because it was not written down. That's why it's called an oral law. You have to realize that this is propaganda. This is a sales. This is a sales talk on their part. The reason that the oral law is not written down, that we don't see any evidence of the oral law in the Tanakh, and I'll explain what I mean by the oral law in a second. The so-called oral law, the quote-unquote oral law, the reason that we don't see any evidence of it in the Tanakh is because it didn't exist, because that's not the way the children of Israel lived their lives in the time of Tanakh. It was only developed much later on, again, during Greek and then later Roman times, Babylonian. There were a lot of Jews living in Babylon and Persia at the time, so it was influenced by all of these foreign cultures: Persian culture, Babylonian culture, Greek culture, Roman culture, and that is what became the so-called, or that was what influenced the so-called oral law, right? So, what are some things that we don't see anywhere in the Tanakh? We don't ever see anyone putting on tefillin. We don't see anyone ever separating milk and meat. We don't see anyone. I don't know what's another example. Lighting Shabbat candles. Actually, though, I think that's mentioned explicitly as a response to the Sadducees. That's another story. But all of these basic things, which are so associated with normative Judaism, or many of these basic things which are so associated with normative Judaism in this day and age, we don't see anywhere in the Tanakh. So whenever the rabbis talk about the oral law, realize that they're talking sales talk, they're talking propaganda, because it's the only way that they can, or it's the only lie that they can sell to the people to explain why their form of Judaism doesn't have any evidence, not in the Tanakh, not in biblical archaeology, not in Near Eastern archaeology, or not in external histories. There were historians that lived dating back, I don't know when the earliest one is, histories before the Common Era, and we don't see, when we get back before the mid-Second Temple period, before about the time of the Maccabees and about the time of the Hasmonean dynasty, we don't see any evidence anywhere of Israel keeping any form of those many things that are so normative in rabbinical Judaism. Okay, so when you hear rabbis talk about their so-called oral law, then I just say no, it's not an oral law. It's the rabbinical innovations or the rabbinical distortions of the Torah. You need to call it an oral law because you need to sell it to the people to explain why there's no evidence, there's no written evidence of it anywhere. Now, this may have worked 500 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, when before modern technology made the Tanakh so accessible to everybody, before biblical archaeology became such a powerful force. Maybe they could get away with this because people didn't really know. They didn't have a good sense of what had gone on in history before then. Yes, there were history books written and there were historians around, but not like today where the information is so accessible. But in this day and age where it's so accessible, then it's easy to verify that this is a bunch of hogwash. Okay. Anyway, getting back to the Sanhedrin, we don't need to read this here. Okay, so the early Sanhedrin. So again, we spoke last week, and let's just review it. Okay, the first historic mention of a Sanhedrion. Again, it's a Greek word. Sin means together, like synchronicity, like sync. And Edrion means to sit. So sitting together, an assembly, occurs in the Psalms of Solomon. which is again Psalms of Solomon. Don't be confused. It's called the Psalms of Solomon. We mentioned last week. It's not part of the Tanakh. It's part of the Apocrypha. Okay, and it's dated to, where do they say, 1st or 2nd century BCE. Part of the Apocrypha. Okay, maybe I should look that up at some point. Let's look it up. Let's have some fun here. Psalms of Solomon, 1749. Let's see if we can look that up. Psalms of Solomon. Psalms of Solomon. Text and discussion. Songs of Solomon, 1749. What do we got here? Let me make this bigger. Translated from the Greek and Syriac. Okay. So we got to go down to 17. So again, what we're looking here is a book from in the Apocrypha. Okay, so these books are dated past the closing of the Tanakh, past the time period that the Tanakh deals with. And here we go to 17. Where did 17 go? It's even a little bit bigger. 17, 9. 17:9. Is it 17:9? Hold on one second here. Where was it? Oops. 1749. 17:9 is a verse from the Torah that's relevant to charism. Okay, 1749. There we go. Okay. His words shall be more refined than costly gold. To the choicest in the assemblies, he will judge the people. The tribes of the sanctified, his words shall be like the words of the Holy One in the midst of the sanctified people. So I have a feeling maybe it's the assemblies. So maybe it's 1748. Let's see if we can look at it in, oh boy, so 1748. Let's see if we can find that word in the Greek. So here's the Greek text. I'll have to pick up on my Greek again. A little bit rusty, but we'll make it out. So let's go down to 17. Again, we're in the Psalm of Solomon, or the Psalms of Solomon. A book from the Apocrypha, 17. No, there's no 1749 here. Let's see, we see some Sanhedrin around here somewhere. If not, we'll just give up on it. I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We get the idea, okay? So let's go back. Let's unwind here. So the Hasmonean court in Judea, presided over by Alexander Jannaeus, one of the Hasmonean kings from the Hasmonean dynasty, until 76 BCE, followed by his wife Salome Alexandra, was called the Sanhedrin or Sanhedrin. So it's a Hasmonean court. Okay, so again, this is much later times. We're talking about 76 BCE. We're talking about the 1st century BCE. The exact nature of this early Sanhedrin is not, may have been a body of sages or priests or a political, legislative, or judicial institution. Okay, so we don't even know what it was. It was some kind of body of sages or priests or political, legislative, and judicial institution. Nobody knows exactly what it was, but it was in the time of Alexander Jannaeus, Alexander Yanai, and Salomon Alexandra. And this is right before the time that the Romans took over the land of Israel. The Romans were basically invited in by the Pharisees, by the rabbis. They even opened the gates of Jerusalem and invited the Romans in, these same Romans that would end up destroying the Second Temple in 70 CE, in less than 200 years later. less than 150 years later. The first historical record of the body was during the administration of Aulus Gabinius. Okay, so we read about him last week. Who was Aulus Gabinius? Was a politician and general of the Roman Republic. He had an important career culminating with the consul in 58 BC, mainly thanks to the patronage of Pompey. His name, blah blah blah. Okay. So, who, according to Josephus, organized 5 Sanhedrin in 57 BCE, as Roman administration was not concerned with religious affairs unless sedition was suspected. So here we see. So let me just point something out. We know that the Romans, they essentially took over the land of Israel in 63 BCE after being invited in by the Pharisees. And so here, if we see in 57 BCE, this is already in Roman times, and the land of Israel was administered by this guy, Aulus Gabinius, at that time. Okay. So was not concerned, as a Roman administration, was not concerned with the religious affairs unless sedition was suspected. Only after the destruction of the Second Temple was the Sanhedrin made up only of sages. Okay. The first, blah, 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 blah. So we'd have to look into this more, but we're not going to do it now. All right. So it seems to be some kind of, so 5 ruling bodies that were set up. In the land of Israel, I'm assuming in the land of Israel, to basically rule over maybe the religious affairs of the Jews. Okay. Josephus describes the Sanhedrin for the first time in connection with the decree of the Roman governor of Syria, Aulus Gabinius, who abolished the constitution and the then existing form of government of Palestine, divided the country into 5 provinces. At the head of each was a Sanhedrin, of which a Sanhedrin was placed. Jerusalem was the seat of one of these. Later, Josephus describes Herod, at the time governor of the Galilee, who later, of course, became king over Israel, as summoned before the Sanhedrin, led by the high priest Hyrcanus II, due to having executed alleged criminals without permission from the Sanhedrin. Eventually, though, Herod would go on to kill many members of the Sanhedrin when he became king. The Mishnah describes the Sanhedrin in this period. Further, this great Sanhedrin met in the hall of hewn stones in the Temple of Jerusalem. It convened every day except festivals and Shabbat. Its members included priests, Levites, and ordinary Jews whose family had a pure lineage, such that their daughters were allowed to marry priests. So everything that the rabbis say regarding the Sanhedrin has to be taken with a grain of salt. Okay? And so on and so forth. After the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, the Sanhedrin was reestablished in Yavne. Yavne is down on the coast, I guess around, I think it's north of Ashkelon, if I'm not mistaken, more or less. After the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, the Sanhedrin was reestablished in Yavne with reduced authority by agreement between Yochanan ben Zakkai, it's a famous story, and Roman Emperor Vespasian. Vespasian agreed in part due to the perception that the Pharisees had not participated in the first result to the extent that other groups had. Thus, the Sanhedrin in Yavne was comprised almost exclusive of Pharisaic scholars. And there we go. So the Pharisees who invited the Romans in 63 BCE to basically take over the land of Israel, they ended up then destroying the temple in 70 CE. And then the rabbis used this occasion to move the Sanhedrin to Yavne and fill it all basically at that point with Pharisees, because now the Sadducees were out of the picture, because the Sadducees, once the temple was destroyed, really didn't have any relevance. They were Cohanim and Levites, mostly Cohanim, who were connected very much to the temple. Okay. Anyway, this is a huge history to be studied here. We're not going to do it all right now, but I think we get the general idea of what's going on. Okay. So we then spoke about a number of places in the Tanakh, and I'll just review what we spoke about. And then we'll look at one other place. So we saw that in Ezekiel chapter 8, if I'm not mistaken, let me go find it here. Ezekiel speaks about all of these horrible things that the Israelites are doing. They are sacrificing unclean animals. They're worshiping the rising sun. And let's see, let's find Ezekiel here. Ezekiel chapter 8. We'll just read in the English to make it go a bit quickly. By the way, can you guys all hear me okay and see me okay? Can we get a sound check? Can you guys hear me and see me okay? Somebody just put in a Y or something like that so I know that the sound and the video are working all right. Okay, good. Okay, so Ezekiel, this is taking a bit to come up, and that's usually a sign that the internet is not working too well, but okay, there we go. Ezekiel chapter 8. Okay. So here in Ezekiel chapter 8, in the 6th year, in the 6th month of the 5th day, while I was sitting in my house, and the elders of Judah were sitting before me. Elders of Judah, here we go, elders, okay? The hand of the sovereign Lord came on me there, and I looked and I saw a figure like that of a man. And we're going to skip ahead because we read this last week. Let's read this part. The Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven, and in visions of God, he took me to Jerusalem, to the entrance of the north gate of the inner court, where the idol that provokes to jealousy stood. So there was an idol, okay, that was being worshipped there. And there before me was the glory of God, of the God of Israel. The glory of the God of Israel that's Kavod Yahweh. That's basically, as we've mentioned many times, that's what lived between the cherubim on the cover of the ark, as in the vision I had seen in the plain. So then he speaks about all the detestable things that the Israelites are doing. And we'll go on here. And what does he see? Ezekiel looks and he sees, I saw portrayed all over the walls all kinds of crawling things and unclean animals and all the idols of Israel. In front of them stood 70 elders of Israel and Jaazaniah, the son of Shaphan. Shaphan, by the way, was the scribe who found the Torah scroll during the time of Yoash, during the time of Josiah, King Josiah. It's a famous story in 2 Kings chapter 22, also very relevant to Karaism. Was standing among them, each had a censer in his hand, and a fragrant cloud of incense was rising. So here we have the 70 elders of Israel, okay, standing in front of all kinds of crawling things and unclean idols and unclean animals and idols of Israel. These are the elders, the 70 elders of Israel in Ezekiel's vision. Okay. Each had a censer in his hand, and a fragrant cloud of incense was rising. So they were burning incense. They were burning incense to unclean animals, or at least idols in the shape of unclean animals and other idols. He said to me, and again, these are the 70 elders. So again, when what is the point of this? When the Rabbinites come along, Shabbat Shalom, Sha'alti al Devora. When the Rabbinites come along and talk about how the Sanhedrin has samchut, has authority, because it's a reconstitution, or it's a rehashing of the 70 elders mentioned throughout the Tanakh, then you can take them to Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 10, and say, just because, let's say the Sanhedrin does consist of, or does represent 70 elders of Israel, that doesn't mean that they are doing the right thing just because they're elders. We see here the 70 elders of Israel. Again, what are they doing? I saw portrayed all over the walls all kinds of crawling things and unclean animals and the idols of Israel. In front of them stood 70 elders of Israel, and Jaazaniah, king son of Shaphan, was standing among them. Each had a censer in his hand, and a fragrant cloud of incense was rising. So these 70 elders of Israel in Ezekiel's vision, based on reality, maybe not directly based on reality, but maybe also directly based on reality, because Yahweh is showing him this. They were burning incense to idols. These are the 70 elders, the same elders that the rabbis claim give the Sanhedrin, or the very fact that the Sanhedrin harkens back to the elders of the Tanakh. The rabbis want to claim that that the Sanhedrin therefore has authority. But here we see the 70 elders sacrificing incense to idols. He said to me, "Son of man, have you seen what the elders of Israel are doing in the darkness, each at the shrine of his own idol? They say, Yahweh does not see us. Yahweh has forsaken the land." Again, he said, you will see them doing things that are even more detestable. So here, that each one is sacrificing to his own idol, and they're doing things even more detestable. What are we talking about? Talking about the elders of Israel. Again, the elders of Israel. Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord, and I saw women sitting there mourning the god Tammuz, which, by the way, is one of the Babylonian names for, we mentioned this last week, for the fourth month of the year. Oops. He said to me, "Do you see the Son of Man? You will see things that are even more detestable than this." And then he brought me to the inner court of the house of Yahweh. And there at the entrance of the temple, between the portico and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs towards the temple of Yahweh and their faces toward the east. They were bowing down to the sun in the east. As I mentioned when we went through the book of Exodus, the Mishkan, the temple to Yahweh, as you enter it, as you walk from the courtyard into the tent of meeting, into the holy area, the kadosh, and then into the holy of holies, the kadosh kadoshim, you're walking from east to west. You're walking away. You're facing away from the rising sun. And a very brilliant person many years ago, or a number of years ago, when I visited the replica of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle in a bit north of Eilat, in Timna Park, and if you're ever in that area, you should go visit it. He pointed out very correctly and very perceptively that the fact that as we walk, or as Israelites walk towards Yahweh, towards the more and more holy areas, we're walking away from the rising sun, and we're facing away from the rising sun, is a polemic against the worship of the rising sun that occurred in so many of the surrounding idol worshiping nations. Because why do you worship the rising sun and not the setting sun? Because the rising sun is becoming stronger, like a god. The setting sun is dissipating, it's becoming weaker. So many of the pagan cultures worshipped the rising sun, and they would face to the east to worship the rising sun. That's exactly what we see here. Okay, they were bowing down to the sun in the east, bowing down to the rising sun, house of the rising sun. He said to me, "Have you seen this, Son of Man? Is it a trivial matter for the people of Judah to do these detestable things they're doing here? Must they also fill the land with violence and continually arouse my anger, etc.?" Okay, so we get the idea. We see explicitly that the elders of Israel, in the vision of Yechezkel, they were burning incense to idols. One second. Where was it that they are first mentioned? So when does Ezekiel have this vision? He has this vision in his own house. It says he was sitting in his house, and the elders of Judah were sitting before me. So he has this vision, right? This is reality. This is not part of the vision. He's sitting in his house. The elders of Judah are sitting before him, and then he has this vision of what the elders are doing, and the Israelites. But the elders are mentioned explicitly here in Ezekiel chapter 8, verse, where was it? 11, chapter 8, verse 11, that the 70 elders of Israel in his vision, and remember, he's having this vision as he's sitting in front of the actual elders of Israel. Okay. that they are worshiping idols, that they're burning incense to idols. Okay, so all this we spoke about last week. I want to show you another place where the elders of Israel are mentioned in less than glowing terms, and that is going to be, let's see if I can remember chapter and verse. So it's the story of the rebellion of Absalom against David. So that is going to be in Second Samuel. Second Samuel. Approximately, I'm gonna go with, let's see. Well, endure is before that. It's First Samuel 28, probably around 15. Let's see. Yes, exactly. Absalom's conspiracy. And again, we'll switch over to the Hebrew if we need to. But at this point, I just want to get the narrative moving quickly. So I'm going to focus more on the English. So this is Absalom rebelling against David. So in the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and 50 men to run ahead of him. He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. We're going to skip ahead a little bit here. So this is the rebellion of Absalom against David. Let's pick it up here. We'll pick it up here. And Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, and say, Absalom is king in Hebron. So Absalom went down to Hebron, which is where David ruled for 7 years before he conquered Jerusalem and moved he became the head of the united kingdom in Jerusalem of all of the tribes. 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. They'd been invited as guests and went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Achitophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, to come from Gilo, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. Verse 13, 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 13, a messenger came and told David, the hearts of the people of Israel are with Absalom. Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin on us and put the city to the sword. The king's officials answered him, your servants are ready to do whatever our lord the king chooses. Okay, so King David is fleeing with his court out of Jerusalem. The king set out with his entire household following him, but he left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. Absalom will end up having sex with these concubines on the roof of the palace to show that he's the new boss. He's the new king. Let's check back in here and see if there are any comments. Get to that one afterwards. So the king set out with all the people following him. They halted at the edge of the city. All his men marched past him, along with the Karaites and the Pelethites. And by the way, I always make a joke because in Hebrew, let's look at this for 1 second in Hebrew. 2 Samuel 15. What verse is it? 2 Samuel 15, 18. Why did it not come up? There we go. I'm sorry. No, this is not the verse. It's another verse I do. I forget it. Doesn't matter. Okay. Any rate, so and all the 600 Gittites who had accompanied him from Gat. Gat is who lived in Gat? Who's from Gat? Samson was. Not Samson. Goliath was from Gat. And here we have 600 Gittites from the city of Samson from the time of the judges, from the city of Gat, I mean, from the city of Goliath, who have now joined David's army under Ittai the Gittite, or at least Ittai the Gittite seems to be the one who is leading them. So we're going to skip ahead a little bit. So Ittai stays loyal. Ittai the Gittite, the person from Gat, the person from the Philistine city where Goliath was born. And there are 5 Philistine cities. Can anyone name the 5 Philistine cities? They always say 2 A's, 2 E's, and a G. Anybody? Going once? Going twice? You can type it in if you wish. Okay. Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron. What am I forgetting? Ekron. Oh boy, now I'm having a mental block. Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron. Gosh, I can't remember the other E, and Gat. What's the other E? Ashdod, Ekron. Oh my God, now I have to look it up. 5 Philistine cities. Of course, Gaza. So Gaza is Gaza, but it's really pronounced Gaza or Gaza. You'll hear the Arabs always pronounce it Gaza, but it's a guttural, so it's with an ayin, Gaza. That's the way it's spelled in the Tanakh. Okay, anywho. So let's find the verse that we want to. So we get the idea. So David is fleeing from Jerusalem because he's afraid that Absalom is going to come with his men, with his followers, and kill David. So David goes up the Mount of Olives. It's also interesting in Ezekiel chapter 9 thereabouts. We see that when Yahweh exits, when the glory of Yahweh, Shabbat Shalom, very good. When the glory of Yahweh exits the temple, in that same vision we saw in Ezekiel, I believe it's actually, I got to plug in a second, in chapter 9 instead of chapter 8, that the glory of Yahweh is taken away and goes up to the Mount of Olives through the east. I've done a number of videos from the Mount of Olives. You can go look them up on the World Alliance of Qara'im YouTube channel. But let's find what I'm looking for here. So it's in 16, blah, 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 blah. Let's just go ahead and find it. In fact, let's do it this way. Elders. No, it's not here. Maybe it's in 14. Just give me 1 second here. There it is. No, it's not. No, it's not. 15. Where is that? 16. That's weird. Okay, must be here. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so all right, so let's just back up a little bit. Chapter 16. So David is fled. And we have this whole incident where Shimei curses David. So let's pick it up here in 2 Samuel 16:15. Meanwhile, Absalom, all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. Then Hushai the Archite, David's confidant, went to Absalom and said to him, "Long live the king, long live the king." Absalom said to Hushai, "So this is the love you show your friend? If he's your friend, why didn't you go with him? In other words, why didn't you go with David?" We'll skip ahead a little bit. And then Absalom asked Ahithophel, who was David's advisor, "Give us your advice. What should we do?" And then Ahithophel, who has defected to Absalom, answers, "Sleep with your father's concubines." Remember, David left his concubines. We saw that earlier, whom he left to take care of the palace, and all Israel will hear that you have made yourself obnoxious to your father in the hands of everyone with you will be more resolute. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof of the palace, of David's palace, and he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Does it mean he did it out in the open on the roof? No, they pitched a tent. They saw him go into the tent where the concubines were, just to make that clear. Now, in those days, the advice of Achitophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. So we see Achitophel, who had defected to Absalom's side, is not a good guy, right? He's telling Absalom to sleep with David's concubines. So obviously not a good guy. And Achitophel said to Absalom, I would choose 12,000 men and set out in pursuit of David. I would attack him while he was weary and weak. I would strike him with terror, and then all the people with him will flee. I'd strike down only the king and bring all the people back to you. The death of the man you seek will mean the return of all, and all the people will be unharmed. This plan seemed good to Absalom and to the elders of Israel. And this is the point that I wanted to make. We see the elders of Israel in the story of Absalom. Are they with David, the rightful king over Israel? No, they've gone over to the side of the rebellion. They've gone over to the side of Absalom. So more evidence that just because a group may be called the elders of Israel, that does not in any way, shape, or form guarantee that they are doing the right things, that they're doing the right things in the eyes of Yahweh. Okay, so when the rabbis come along and say that the 71 members of the great Sanhedrin constitute or have authority because they're a continuation of the elders of Israel, of the Ziknei Yisrael. We'll look at this verse for a second in Hebrew, perhaps. Then you could say back to them, you could point to them to Ezekiel chapter 8, verse, what's it, 15? I don't remember the exact verse, but Ezekiel chapter 8 and 2 Samuel chapter 17, two examples where the elders of Israel were not only were they not doing the right thing, they were doing horrible things. In the case of Ezekiel chapter 8, they were burning incense to idols. And in the case of 2 Samuel chapter 17, they had sided with Absalom against King David, the king who was anointed by Samuel, the last judge over, I'm sorry, not by Samuel. That was Shaul that was anointed by Samuel, my mistake. But at any rate, who was anointed king over Israel, no, by Samuel, before he died. Okay? Rightful king over Israel. And here we see the elders of Israel are siding with Absalom. They're siding with Absalom. Okay? Okay. Let me close. I'll leave this open just in case. And let's see where else the elders of Israel mentioned here. So 2 Samuel 17:4 and then 17:15. So let's read down to that. So summon also Hushai the Archite, so we can hear what he has to say as well. Hushai replied to Absalom, the advice Achitophel has given you is not good this time. You know your father and his men, they are fighters, and as fierce as a wild bear, blah, 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 etc. And let's skip ahead. So the Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than that of Achitophel, for Yahweh had determined to frustrate the good advice of Achitophel in order to bring disaster on Absalom. Okay? So basically what's going on here? So Hushai was loyal to David, and Hushai was giving on purpose bad advice, which is not to go out and fight David. Achitophel had given the correct advice, which would have been to take all the men out and go fight David. Okay. Verse 15, Hushai told Zadok and Abiatar, the priests, Achitophel has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel to do such and such, but I have advised them to do so and so. Now send a message at once and tell David, do not spend the night at the fords in the wilderness. Cross over without fail, or the king and all the people with him will be swallowed up. So Hushai was trying to advise Absalom and his men not to go after David because he knows that David, as we see here, Hushai knows that David would have fallen in battle against Absalom because Absalom had the upper hand at this point. But we see the advice of Achitophel was actually was the correct advice. In other words, Achitophel had really defected from David and joined the side of Absalom. Okay, and then we have in 17, Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying in Rogel. A female servant was to go and inform them, and they were to go and tell King David, for they could not risk being seen entering the city. And where was the other place where we saw the elders? 1 second. Oops. I thought it was 17. Let's try this again. $15. Okay. So here it is. Right. So Achitophel, who was really out to get David, has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel to do such and such. So there it is. The elders are mentioned again. Again, proof that the elders at this point had abandoned David and had defected to the side of Absalom. Okay, and once again, how does all of this relate back to the Sanhedrin? The rabbis want to say that the Sanhedrin is a reconstitution of the elders, the 70 elders, which are mentioned a number of times in the Torah. And that is what gives them their authority. Just as the elders had some kind of authority, even though we saw in Exodus chapter 24 and in Numbers chapter 11, was it, if I'm not mistaken? I can't remember exactly where it was. At any rate, when Moses passes some of his spirit onto the elders, we saw, or we could say at that time, that somehow or another means that any body of elders automatically has authority. And that's what the rabbis want to say. The rabbis want to say that the Sanhedrin constitutes the body of elders, just like it was under Moses, the 70 elders, even though, again, they never ruled by majority, but somehow that the Sanhedrin, the great Sanhedrin, reconstitutes the idea of the 70 elders, and that's what gives them their authority. And when any rabbinite tells us this, we can always go to Ezekiel chapter 8, and we can go to 2 Samuel chapter 17, and we can see that the elders, in the time of Ezekiel, burned incense to idols. And we could see that in the time of the rebellion of Absalom, that the elders sided against the rightfully anointed king of Israel, David, and sided with Absalom. Okay, so don't go ahead and say that just because a body, even if it were true, which it's not, that the Sanhedrin is somehow a reconstitution of the 70 elders of Israel. Even if so, we have 2 examples here, and there are more in the Tanakh, where the elders are doing horrible things. Okay, so that ends our study on the Sanhedrin. Oh, okay, didn't do it. What's going on here? Did we freeze up? No, I think we're okay. 1 second. The internet might just be a little. Oh, I've got to plug in. Okay, I'm going to try to plug in really quickly. If I don't, I'll be back. Computer might close down. Just give me a second here. Okay, I think we're plugged in. Get the window open. You're welcome. My pleasure. And if you guys have any information to add to this, please let me know. I'm always looking for new information because the rabbis are so hooked on the Sanhedrin idea. They will not make any major changes in rabbinical. There are a lot of rabbinical Jews who realize that some major changes need to be made with rabbinical Judaism, but they have this idea stuck in their head that first they have to reconstitute the Sanhedrin before they're able to do it, because the Sanhedrin was disbanded, as we saw in, was it 420 CE, thereabouts. And so they think the only way we can make these changes, for instance, we as Karaites, what do? We declare the new month by the actual observation of the new moon. We all know that. In fact, the new moon is coming up tomorrow. I'll have to send out a message. Maybe I'll do it today. And the rabbis won't do it. There are many, I would say, more forward-thinking rabbinites who would like to do it, who realize that it should be done and it needs to be done, but they say we can't do it until the Sanhedrin is reconstituted. So they have such a fixation, just as I mentioned, in their synagogues, they have such a fixation on the Torah scroll that it almost becomes an idol. So they have such a fixation on the idea of the Sanhedrin that they refuse to make any major changes in their rabbinical law without first reconstituting the Sanhedrin. And hence, as we saw, a number of modern attempts to reconstitute the Sanhedrin so they can go ahead and do this. But why am I dead set against the Sanhedrin being reconstituted? I do not want, and neither does 99%, I don't know about 99%, 90%, probably even greater, including probably many religious Jews, do not want this nation to be run by a rabbinical, a Talmudic, or they don't want a Talmudic theocracy, the theocracy to be installed as the rulers of this nation. Not only do they not want it, I can guarantee you 100% that any attempt to do so will cause outright civil war, and it will be a vicious civil war, an absolutely vicious civil war. One could even say that the whole judicial reform situation that was the big news in Israel before October 7th, completely took over the news, was over this issue, because the judicial reform, which was headed mostly by the right and the religious right, the left worried, and I think rightfully so, that it was, in a sense, it was an attempt to install a Talmudic theocracy, maybe not right away, but one more step in the direction of installing a Talmudic theocracy in the state of Israel. I don't want a Talmudic theocracy. I have a very good friend who calls this type of these type of rabbinical politicians, or these type of rabbinical Jews, rabbis who want to reinstate Talmudic law as the law of the land. He calls them rabbino-fascists, and I think he's right on line. Now, many years ago, I was a follower of Rabbi Kahana. This was before of Meir Kahana, and this was before I became a Karaite. And there's still many things that I agree with that Kahana said and did, but over the years I've moved away from Kahana because I realized that what his real intention was to ultimately install a Talmudic theocracy as the law of the land in Israel. In other words, he was, as my friend would call him, a rabbino-fascist. I don't want a Talmudic as a Karaite. I certainly don't want a Talmudic theocracy installed as the ruling body over, or as the government of Israel. It would be like Iran, maybe even worse, in the sense that it would be such a departure from true Tanakh, from true Torah, that it would be, definitely not what I want, and definitely not what most of the nation wants. What do I want? I want the return of a true Torah/Tanakh government, a ruler like King David, a ruler like King Solomon, these great rulers that not only so-called religious people could relate to. In fact, the religious people probably relate to them less, than the secular people. But secular Israelis, the vast majority of secular Israelis, I think, would relate very much to a leader that was like a King David or like a King Solomon that stuck to the original form of the Torah. Who could not love King David and who could not love King Solomon, right? But can you love if the nation were run by Rabbi such and such, Orthodox Rabbi such and such, who now was imposing that law on the rest of Israel? Would you want that? I certainly would not. And the vast majority of Jews and Israelis would for sure not want it. And it would cause outright, without any doubt, it would cause a civil war. It's probably the reason that Meir Kahane was killed, or it's possibly the reason that Meir Kahane was killed. No, who knows? That's already maybe getting into conspiracy theories, and I don't like to go in that direction. But it's possible that either his security was he didn't have as much security as he should have, maybe at the very least. I think that was partially by his own choice, but it might have also been by design. Any rate, who knows? We needed Josiah. He had experience getting the nation to return to Torah, or a Ezra and a Nehemiah, or King David. Okay, so that's that. Let me put on a song and let's get set up to delve into the main part of the study, which is Leviticus chapter 21. We need to finish off 20, so I'll finish off 20 very briefly, and then we'll dig into chapter 21. So just give me a minute here. I'll put on a bit of music. Give me a second, please.
Avramavino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Avramavino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Cuando el rey Nimrod al campo salía, vino en el cielo y en la estrellería, viéndolo santa en la judería, que había de nacer Abraham Avino. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. La mujer de Terra de Penana, día en día ella preguntaba qué tenía la cara tan demorada. Ella ya sabía el bien que tenía. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel.
Los meses quería, ia caminando por campos en viñas, y a su marido no le descubría, topó una mara liparería. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel.
Na 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 Hashem Melech Hashem Malach Hashem Yimloch Leolam Va'ed Hashem Melech Hashem Malach Hashem Yimloch Leolam Va'ed והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד שמו אחד הוי ננאי 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 נאי 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 השם מלך השם מלך השם ימלוך לעולם ועד השם מלך השם מלך השם ימלוך לעולם ועד והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד שמו אחד הוי והיה השם על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד הוי ננאי 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 נאי נאי ננאי נאי 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 oy nay 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 השם למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד אוי נה 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 nay nay na na nay 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 na nay 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 na na nay na na nay na nay na 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 nay 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 na na nay 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 na nay oy nay nay na na nay
Okay, we're back once again. This is Hakham Melech ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im, and we are going to dig into the meat of this week's Torah study, which is Leviticus chapter 21. We need to finish off 20 very quickly, so I will do it very quickly, I promise. Well, I always promise I never do, but I'll try to promise. And so let me share the screen here. And here we are in Leviticus chapter 20. We're starting in verse 22. Okay. And so these are kind of summary verses. We've gone through chapter 20, which we said is kind of a rehashing of chapters 18 and 19. We saw that chapter 19 was kind of a rehashing of Exodus chapter 20, the 10 Commandments. To a certain degree, it refers back to itself. And as I always like to say, the Torah is very self-referential. It's constantly referring back to itself, to other places in itself. It's the original hyperlinked text. How does it link? It links through words, phrases, and concepts, deliberately recalling or deliberately alluding to other parts of the text. So it is the world's first Wikipedia. It's the world's first hyperlinked text. I don't know about the world's first, but let's go with the world's first hyperlinked text. So the Torah, again, as I always like to say, is self-referential, constantly referencing other places in itself. The Torah referencing other places in the Torah, the Tanakh constantly referencing other stories in the Tanakh, or stories, phrases, ideas, phrases, the Torah. Okay, so that was Exodus 19. It was kind of a rehashing. Sorry, Leviticus 19 was kind of a rehashing of Exodus 20 to a certain degree. There were many other things that were interjected there, but we saw a bunch of the 10 Commandments mentioned explicitly. And Leviticus 18, I'm sorry, and Leviticus 20 is also a rehashing of Leviticus 18, which mostly is dealing with, I never like to use the word sexual immorality because I don't think it implies what the Torah is really trying to get at. So I always like to use the word sexual depravity. What the Torah is really against when it comes to, the Torah is not prudish. The Torah is pretty, I would say, liberal when it comes to sexual matters. But where it draws the line, where Yahweh draws the line, is with outright depravity. So having sex with an animal, having, boinking another guy up the butt, having sex with a woman while she's menstruating, and having sexual relations. All of these things they're not just, a little bit weird. They are depraved. They are, any normal person would say, this is, you've crossed a red line here. Okay. And that's what Torah is really dealing with. At any rate, so now we come to the end of chapter 20. And as is often the case when we come to an end of a topic, and we're going to get into a completely different topic afterwards, we kind of have these summary paragraphs, these summary sentences, and that's what we're going to see here. So this is kind of a summary for at least this chapter, and maybe hearkening back to chapters 19, 18, perhaps even more. So verse 22, Shmartem et kol hukotai, ואת כל משפטי ועשיתם אותם, ולא תקיא אתכם הארץ אשר אני מביא אתכם שמה לשבת בה. So keep all of these statutes and all of these judgments. Now, the rabbis like to make a big deal between the difference between statutes and judgments. I've said many times, I think that what we have here is your classic case of parallelism, or shall we say repetition. The Torah will often repeat things word for word, or it will use synonyms. And when it can use synonymous words, it can use synonymous phrases. In this case, it's using synonymous words. And as we say, every Torah study, repetition means emphasis. So there's no real difference, in my opinion, between, at least in this context, between chukotai and mishpatai. Mishpatai, chukotai meaning usually translated as statutes, from chakuk or chok, which means to engrave or to chisel. So a statute, like a statue. And I believe they come from the same word. And mishpatai means judgments, from shapat, to judge. But really, it means the same thing. It's just repetition. It's just synonymous repetition, meaning emphasis. In other words, you keep all of my laws. Okay, Torah does this constantly. Wa'asitem otam, and do them. V'lo taki etchem haaretz, in order that the land does not vomit you out. Taki is to vomit, even in modern Hebrew. That's how you say to vomit. Laki. Okay. Asher ani ve'etchem shama, that I bring you there. L'shevet ba, to dwell in it. Let's check in to make sure everything's working. Okay, just sound checking everything. Everything seems to be okay. You guys hear me okay? You guys see me okay? Internet is working okay? Can I just get a yes from somebody just to know that things are working okay? Somebody let me know. Hello, Jacob. A little choppy, right? Yeah. I can try to switch. Let me try to switch networks. Just give me 1 second here. Give me 1 second, please. Okay, just give me a minute here. And I'll switch over to a different network, and maybe that'll solve the problem. Let's try this. Okay, hopefully that's going to be a bit better. I constantly have to play around with networks. It was very nice when I was living in Portugal. So we had horrible internet, and then finally a friend of mine back in the United States said, "Why don't you order Starlink, the Elon Musk company that beams internet through, or has internet connection through satellites." And we ordered Starlink, and it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. It was very inexpensive. Uh-oh, are we freezing up again? Hold on a second here. I'm on the wrong one. Hold on a second. Let's try this. Okay, hopefully that's going to be better. If the internet gets choppy again, just let me know. But at any rate, we ordered Starlink, and we had the satellite on our roof in the house in Portugal, and it was amazing. It was the best internet I've ever had. It would usually, are we freezing up? Yeah, it's amazing. So you've had Starlink. Okay, how is it now? Can I just get a sound check, Paul? Are you hearing me okay now? Is everything back? Is everything kind of normal? So yeah, when we ordered Starlink back in Portugal, went from getting about, with our old ADSL connection, which is basically internet over. Okay, good. which is basically internet over telephone lines, we'd get about, I think, 8 megabits per second. And when we had Starlink, we were getting about 250 megabits per second. It was amazing. It was amazing. It just changed my whole experience because we lived out in the middle of nowhere in Portugal, like in an agricultural area that did not have, any of the latest internet infrastructure. But now that I came to Israel, they don't have Starlink in Israel, or I had to return the kit before I left Portugal, and they don't have Starlink in Israel, so whatever. There is fiber optics here, but it's where I am right now. It's a bit difficult to connect to the fiber optic network, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, okay, let's move on. So we are in verse 23. Okay. So ולא תלכו בחוקות הגוי אשר אני משלח מפניכם, כי את כל אלה עשו ועקוץ בם. So do not go according to the laws. Again, if you want to be technical, statutes, but I don't think it's really making a distinction. So do not go according to the statutes of the nation, of the people asher ani meshalech mipnechem, that I am sending out before you, that I'm expelling before you. Because they've done all of these things. All of what things? All the things we've been studying about in Leviticus 20, Leviticus 19, Leviticus 18. Again, I'd have to look back in the text to see exactly where the opening sentence for this summary kind of paragraph is, but at least for the past couple of chapters, starting at probably in Leviticus 18 is probably what it's referring back to. Okay, maybe just chapter 20. At any rate, kol ela asuva akutzbam. Akutz, I got fed up with them. Akutz comes from the underlying root kuf sadiketz, which means like to stop or to stop abruptly. So the image there. Let's see. Feel a loathing, abhorrent, sickening dread. The form of Karaites. Yeah, a primitive root identical with kutz through the idea of severing oneself from, to be causally make, disgusted, or anxious. Okay. So kutz. So akutzbam. So so I guess maybe we're using the BDB's interpretation of the word. Then it would be that I suddenly decided to cut off. Let me just look at it a bit more for my own edification. Dread. 1 second. Feel a sitting dread. It's in Isaiah. Severing oneself from. Okay, maybe. I always understood it as meaning akutz, like I suddenly, severing in a sense. I guess that is a good way of saying it. But akutz means like to suddenly stop. Ketz. Or we were reading in the synagogue Parshat Noach this week. So ketz kol basar balefanai. I think I'm quoting that correctly. The end, the sudden end of all flesh has come before me. That's what God says when he's I don't know if he says it to Noach. I'd have to look it up again, but says it regarding the fact that he's going to bring the flood on humanity. So akutzbam. So I suddenly decided to cut them off, or I got sick and tired of them suddenly. Okay. Verse 24. Wa omar lochem atem tivshu et admatam wa ani etnena lochem lareshet ota. And I'll stop right there because we're going to get into a very famous phrase. And I said to you, you will inherit, you will take over, you will inherit their land. And I will give it to you, Loreshet, to inherit it, Ota. Eretz Zavat Halaf, Zavat Halav Udvash, a land flowing with milk and honey. Here we have the phrase, a land flowing with milk and honey. It occurs a number of times. Okay. In the Torah, in the Tanakh, including one time where the Israelites are mocking God and telling Moses, "You took us out of a land flowing with milk and honey," speaking about Egypt, about Mitzrayim. Okay, but here we have the phrase "Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash." To point out one very quick thing, that the word Zavat, which is translated as flowing. Remember, if you remember, we learned about when we were learning the laws of Ti'umah and Tahara, of ritual impurity and purity and impurity, or having the cooties and being cleansed of the cooties. We spoke about discharges from the male sexual organ and the female sexual organ, and there was a regular discharge in each case, and then there was an irregular discharge, and the irregular discharge was called a or the person who was having the irregular discharge was called a zav or a zava, and it was often translated as an irregular flow or an abnormal flow. That's the same root here. Okay, so the same root that was speaking about abnormal flows, or the same word that was speaking about abnormal flows from the private parts of men and women, is now being used in a completely different context of a land flowing, zavat chalav udvash, flowing with milk and honey. Now, a lot of people, or some people, say that dvash, especially in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 8, where 8 verse 8, I believe 8 verse 8, let me just check that. Deuteronomy 8:8. Yes, okay. So here's the so-called seven species, the seven species of the land of Israel. Eretz Kitav, Sirah, Gefen, V'te'ena, Rimon, Ve'eretz Zayit, Shemen, Udvash. And then in 8:10, well, that's a different story. But in 8:8, we have the seven species. And some people claim here that because all of these are the seven species of the land, or 6 of the 7 species of the land are vegetable or plant sources, right? Chita is wheat, orah is barley, gefen is grapevine, te'ina is fig, rimon is pomegranate, eretz zayit shemen, and zayit shemen is olive oil. So they claim that dvash in this case means must also be a plant source, and they say that it means date honey, and they sell date honey. It's popular to this day. Sold in Israel. It's called sil'an. I don't know if that's an Arabic word. I don't know where they get the word sil'an, but it's very popular. But I don't think that's the case. And what's the contravening using that word correctly? I don't like to use words unless I know exactly what they mean. What's the opposing proof that we have here, that the word dvash, honey, is linked with halav, which in this case clearly means milk. And no, we're not talking about oat milk or soy milk or something like that. We're talking about milk from cows or goats, milk from animals. So that's an animal source, and here we have dvash. So that implies that also is, or at least at the very least could be, an animal source. At any rate, here we have Eretz Zavat, Halav Udvash, a land flowing with milk and honey. Ani Yahweh, I'm Yahweh Elohechem Asher, I'm Yahweh your God, Asher Ivdalti Etchem Mina Amim, who has separated you out, who's made a distinction between you, or separated you out from the other nations. Okay, the nation of Israel is different. The nation of Israel is special. All of the other nations, in a certain sense, are lumped together. Yes, they all have their own languages. They all have their own cultures. They all have their own laws, but they're kind of the same at the end of the day, in the sense that they are not in direct covenant. They don't have a direct contract, a direct covenant, a direct brit covenant with Yahweh to be his special chosen nation and to represent him on this earth, and to set up a model society that is supposed to be an example to the entire world of the way a society is supposed to work, is supposed to run, by these wise rules that are laid down by him. Okay, verse 25. והבדלתם בין הבהמה הטהורה לטמאה ובין העוף הטמא לטהור. And so I'll go up to half the verse, the first verset. I like to call it the verselet, it sounds better than verset, but the technical term is verset. means a part of a verse. And so you shall make distinctions. You shall separate the clean or the pure, the acceptable in this case, I believe, is the best way to translate the word Torah, but it's the same word that means ritual purity, ritual impurity, and that they are related to a certain degree. But the acceptable, or I'll just go with pure animals, and the impure animals, but it really means those that are acceptable for human beings. And yes, I said human beings, not Israel. We are in contract, we are in covenant to eat only these animals, but it's really meant for all of humanity. It's not appropriate for human beings to eat snake and rat and ants and maggots. Okay, we're not animals, but we as the nation of Israel, that's what we just saw before, that we're separated out from the rest of the nations as set up, or to show the rest of the world how human beings are supposed to act. And one of the ways we're supposed to act is to separate between animals that are acceptable for human beings to eat and those that are not acceptable. And that's the Torah. The pure animals are really what it means in this context. It's the acceptable animals, and the Tame'ah are the unacceptable, the disgusting animals that unless you're a cat or a dog, you wouldn't eat them. Even cats and dogs won't eat some of this stuff. Okay, uvena ofa tameh letahor, and the same with the birds, or at least the flying creatures. V'lo tishakatzu et nafshotechem b'bavhema uba'of v'chol asher tirmos ha'adama asher hivdati lachem letameh, and do not make yourselves disgusting. Tishakatzu et nafshotechem, do not make your, not nefesh really means body. A lot of times it translates soul, but it's not really what it means. In some contexts, it might be talking about something along those lines, but it really means your bodies or your souls. I'll go with bodies this time. So really yourselves. So do not make yourselves disgusting. Okay. With animals or birds or anything that scurries across the land, which I have separated out to you as impure, as unacceptable. Okay, in other words, don't eat unkosher foods, don't eat unkosher meats. Kashrut, remember, only has to do with meat, and that's one of my proofs for, I guess you could say, vegetarianism, that there's no such thing as an unkosher plant. There's no types of plant. There might be poisonous plants, that's another story, but there's nothing that's considered unacceptable. There's no plant that's considered unacceptable for human beings to eat. We only see this concept of pure and impure species within the animal world, not within the plant world. You could be anywhere in the world, okay, and you could walk up to any plant, and once you've determined that it's not poisonous and has a decent taste, then you can eat it. You don't have to worry about whether it's quote unquote kosher or unkosher. So this whole concept of acceptable and unacceptable foods only applies within the animal world, not within the plant world. Something I always like to point out. And to me, that's one of many proofs for the ultimate. Okay, Paul, see ya. Shabbat Shalom. And Shavuot Tov, I guess where you are, Shabbat Shalom. Okay, one of the many proofs that the Torah is kind of has a preference for vegetarianism, and we won't get into all of that right now. Verse 26, and you shall be for me holy, you shall be holy to me, kadosh ani, because I am holy, kadosh ani, Yahweh, because I, Yahweh, am holy, va'avdil etchem min amim liot li, and have separated you out from the rest of the nations, from the peoples, to be for me, to be mine. Okay, so we mentioned that Leviticus 17 through 26, if I'm not mistaken, let me just look this up, is called by secular scholars the Holiness Code. They attribute it, let's go a little bit into secular ideas, even though I don't agree with them at all. Oops. But it's important, I think, to know them, just like it's important to be an expert in Christianity. It's important to be an expert in Islam. It's important to be an expert in history. It's important to be an expert in Talmud as much as possible. So this is, in secular scholarship, the Holiness Code is what the secular scholars believe is a subset of the L source. Okay, let's read this very quickly. The Holiness Code is used in biblical criticism biblical criticism is the idea among the secular scholars. And if you really want to watch a very, very brilliant guy who holds to biblical criticism, he's a Jew. He's a brilliant, brilliant Torah scholar. It's such a shame, and he's, I guess, traditional. I don't know about religious, but he's a brilliant Torah scholar. His name is Joel Baden. He's a professor of either divinity or religion, I can't remember, at Yale University. And if you listen to some of his stuff, you will see what a brilliant, brilliant Torah scholar he is. But he's very into this documentary hypothesis of this biblical criticism, which is the idea that the Torah is written by essentially 4 different sources that were then gathered together, that were then what's the word I'm looking for? Codified into the text that we know as the Torah. Of course, I don't believe this, but this is what a lot of secular scholars believe. Okay, so it's chapters 17 through 26, and sometimes passages in other books of the Pentateuch, especially Numbers and Exodus. It is so called due to its highly repeated use of the word holy, which we just saw in this verse. That's why I'm bringing this up. Kadosh. Kadosh is usually translated as holy, but originally meant to set apart with special, clean, pure, whole, and perfect as associated meanings. So I guess we'll just read a bit more. The term holiness code was first coined as the, now I have to read German, Heiligkeitsgesetz, literally holiness law. The word code therefore means criminal code by German theologian August Klostermann in 1877. Critical biblical scholars have regarded it as a distinct unit and have noted that the style is noticeably different from the main body of Leviticus. So I guess Leviticus 1 through 16. Because Leviticus ends at chapter 26, unlike the remainder of Leviticus, the many laws of the Holiness Code are expressed very closely packed together and very briefly. According to most versions of the documentary hypothesis, again, this is a secular idea that the text of the Torah is an agglomeration of writings from a number of different sources. The Holiness Code represents an earlier text that was edited and incorporated into the priestly or the P source and the Torah as a whole, although some scholars, such as Israel Knoll, whoever the heck that is, believe the Holiness Code to be a later addition to the priestly source. This source is often abbreviated as H. A date generally accepted by the proponents of the 4 sources hypothesis is sometime in the 7th century, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we're getting all into secular biblical scholarship, which I don't want to delve into too much, but just did want to make you aware of that. But what we do see here is this call out again by Item li kadoshim ki kadosh ani Yahweh. You shall be holy to me because I, Yahweh, am holy, and I have separated, and therefore I have separated you out, just as I have, but or I separated, but the implication there is therefore I've separated you out from the other nations to be mine. Verse 27, and this will bring us to the end of Leviticus chapter 20. Ish or Isha. Again. Ish or Isha. Ki ye'eh bahem ov or yid oni mot yu matu. Even yir gemu otam v'mehem bam. So any man or woman that has in him, as in them, a ov or yidoni. Okay, so an ov is usually translated as a medium, and a yidoni is translated as a familiar spirit. The wording here is a little bit strange, and maybe we'll look at Robert Alter to get some insight onto what he thinks about this. But here it says they have an ov or yidoni, so a medium or familiar spirit in them. So it works for yidoni if we translate that as a familiar spirit, but an ov, a medium in them? No, they are a medium. So this is why nobody is ever, you'll see when you look at a lot of the commentaries, nobody really knows what the word ov or yidoni exactly means. But the what it's dealing with or what it's talking about is contacting the dead, having a seance and contacting the dead, as we saw in 1 Samuel chapter 28. The most famous example of that is when Saul goes to the Ov Endor, the medium or the witch of Endor, and asks her to bring up, did I say Samuel? No, Saul, Shaul goes to the witch of Endor, the medium of Endor, and asks her to bring up Samuel, who has recently died. to help him out with the Philistines. And instead he says, you're going to be with me tomorrow, you and your sons. And then Saul and Jonathan die in battle the next day. So anyone who basically deals with contacting the dead, really for the purposes of, we want to be very precise, for the purposes of asking them advice on what to do, because you're not supposed to go to dead people to ask advice. You're not supposed to go to the stars. That's astrology. I keep on pointing out that I had to unfriend him in the end, but I had this friend on Facebook who published a book named Kosher Astrology. That's like publishing a book called Kosher Murder or something like that. It's insanity. At any rate, you don't go to the stars. You don't use star reading. You don't divine. You don't throw tea leaves on the floor or chop up livers and whatever all the other whatever all the other stuff is, the other ways that people try to predict the future. And you don't go to the dead and try to ask them, what should I do? As Saul did through the Witch of Endor. You go directly to Yahweh, either through a prophet, or through the Urim and Tumim, which we don't have anymore, or through prayer. But you don't go to these unkosher, quote unquote, ways of contacting Yahweh. So mot yumatu, so they will most certainly die. They should definitely be put to death. But Evan yirgamu otam, the man bam, they shall be, everyone shall stone them, or people shall stone them to death with or shall pelt them with rocks. Demand bomb, their blood is upon them. And we spoke about this phrase, demand bomb. In other words, they are, even though the people pelting them with rocks have physically the ones exposing their blood, really they have, or spilling their blood, really they have spilled their own blood by this action. They are responsible for their own blood being spilled. Okay, let's go on to Leviticus 21. We'll go for maybe another 15, 20 minutes or something. Now we get into a completely different topic. Okay, and by the way, we have here a pei, which means pasha ptucha. That's the Torah's way of saying it's the end of a chapter. The chapter and verses that we see are from the Middle Ages. A monk by the name of, is it Stephen Kovney or something like that, set up these chapters and verses. But really, in the Masoretic text, we already have we certainly have verse endings. That's these colons here. But we also have chapter endings and paragraph endings, and we see a peh in the Masoretic texts that represents what we could essentially say is a chapter ending. Okay, it's the end of a certain subject. So now we're going on to Leviticus chapter 21. We're dealing with another topic here. And this topic is going to be, we're going back to the priests, which much of Leviticus deals with. And now we're going to talk about priests, who they're allowed to marry, who they're not allowed to marry, and how they are allowed and not allowed to mourn. But before we do that, maybe we should let's just do a little Robert Alter and see if he brings out anything interesting. These final verses here. 24. It's 2024. Let me just go back to 20 for a second. 24. רשת אותה רצבת חלב ודבש אני יהוה אלוהיכם אשר ידעתי אתכם מן העמים. I'm not sure what he's trying to say there in 24. Tim Tirshu. Okay, I got it. Okay, we could just skip that. So set you apart, you shall set apart. There is a clear system of what one might well describe as cosmic analogies functioning here. Holiness depends upon distinction, upon being set apart and setting things apart. Israel has been set apart by God to be holy, to be different from other nations. Israel, in turn, is enjoined to realize its distinctive character by relinquishing the indiscriminate consumption of all living things and setting apart the unclean from the clean. Okay, nice comment. Almost like, doesn't really add much, but nicely stated. So consumption of all living things. Okay. And then you shall not make yourselves despicable. This is in verse 25. Okay, that's this word here. This phrase, "V'lo yishakatsu." Okay, shall not make yourselves disgusting, despicable. Basically by eating these inappropriate animals. And Robert Alter says, Milgram chooses to render this as you shall not defile your throats. This is a distinctly possible interpretation, if not entirely compelling. The Hebrew nephesh means life breath, and then synecdochially, person, but also metonymically, throat. We'll talk about what all these words means. The passage through which the breath is conducted. In the present context, however, which stresses the imperative for Israel to preserve its holiness as a people set apart, the defiling the whole person rather than the throat seems more likely as in intended meaning. We actually kind of discussed this very issue in this verse. So we translate nephesh as soul, as body, as person. In the end, we went with person. And so Robert Alter is agreeing with that. Right, the whole person. Look what he's saying here. So the idea of so nephesh, he says, really means life breath. And synecdochially, and we can look up what that means. I think the classic example they give is, well, we'll see. Synecdoche. Synecdoche, New York. A figure of speech which part is made to represent the whole or vice versa, as in Cleveland won by 6 runs, meaning Cleveland's baseball team. Okay, so it's where a part represents a whole or a whole represents a part. And so the part is representing the whole. So nephesh really means life breath, but synecdochally it's extended to mean the person, right? Because the person has within him the breath of life. And so metonymically, let's look up that word. So it's a figure of speech in which a concept is referred to by the name of something closely associated with that thing or concept. What's an example of metonymy? The pen is mightier than the sword. Here, the pen is used to refer to writing, while the sword is used to refer to warfare and violence. Okay. Let's go back. Right, but also metonymically throat. So we do see in some cases where the word nephesh means throat. Let me just find one. Oops. One second here. So here, it's Tehillim, it's Psalms Samech Tet, Nun Samech. So that's going to be 69, verse 2. Let's take a look at that for a second. Psalm 69, verse 2. Oops. The wrong button. Okay, Lemantzech al Shoshanim David. Let's go. Okay. Oshi'eni Elohim. Redeem me. Save me, Elohim. Ki ba'u mayim ad nafesh. Because water has come up to my neck. So in this case, we see the word nafesh, meaning neck. But again, the word nafesh, the basic meaning of the word nafesh is not neck. It means the breath. Let me just see if there's anything else I want to say here. I don't think so. It means the breath, but by metonymy, right? Concepts that are close to each other. So the pen is mightier than the sword really means writing is mightier than violence. So by metonymy, we see there in Psalms 69 verse, there was 1 in that Psalm, so 69 verse 1, that by metonymy, it means the neck, because the neck is where the breath is. Okay, so as I've said many times, and it's very important, I've had so many discussions with people who don't understand this basic concept of biblical Hebrew. Who don't understand this basic concept of biblical Hebrew, that words in biblical Hebrew, they have a basic meaning and they have extended meanings. Okay, and this is a classic example. So the basic meaning of the word nefesh is the breath. By extension, it can mean the entire body, okay, because if there's no breath in the body, then the body is dead. Or it can mean, by extension, the person, okay, in the sense of, like, we may say the whole person or something like that. And then again, by extension, it can mean the neck. Okay. So basic meaning and extended meanings. And a lot of mistakes are made by people who read English translations of the Tanakh. They're made because they see the translation of the word into English, and they don't realize that the meaning, well, how can I explain it? Or maybe they look at the Hebrew and they don't realize that the meaning can or that word can have different meanings depending on its context, because words will have basic meanings and extended meanings. In this case, how is the word nefesh extended? It's extended by this synic doke to mean the entire person, the entire body, and extended further to mean the entire person in a conceptual sense. And it's extended by this metonymy to mean the neck. But the basic meaning of the word nefesh is, again, the breath that is going through the mouth, right, and passes through the neck area. But it does not mean neck, it means breath. Okay, let's move on to Leviticus chapter 21. And I remember I learned with a rabbi many years who used to teach that the word nefesh means neck. And he would confuse meanings of the word nefesh, and he would teach that the basic meaning of the word nefesh is neck. That is incorrect. Okay, verse 21, and we're going to stop soon, but let's at least start chapter 21 here. Okay. Wayomer Yahweh. Let me just check in here. Okay, Wayomer Yahweh el Moshe. So Yahweh said to Moses, Emor el Kohanim b'nei Aharon. Say to the Kohanim, the sons of Aharon. So God is telling Moses, Yahweh is telling Moses, and then Moses is telling Aaron. V'marta aleim, and say to them, lenefesh. Here we have again the word nefesh. So it doesn't mean neck here. It means person. Lenefesh. Lo yitama be'amal. So let's explain what this means. So this is to the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron. Lenefesh lo yitama be'amal. So a person should not enter a state of impurity for another person. But what's the context here? As we'll see in a second, it means a deceased person, someone who has died. We saw earlier, and I won't fish it out now, but we saw earlier in Leviticus that if you come in contact with a dead body, even if you're in the same house or the same tent as a dead body, then you get the cooties. You acquire ritual impurity. And what this verse is saying is that a Kohen should not come in contact at all with come in the vicinity of a dead person, so that Kohen doesn't acquire the kudis, doesn't become tameh, doesn't become ritually impure. We're going to see some exceptions coming up, but that's the basic idea. So a regular Israelite can go in the vicinity of a dead body, right? Doctors need to do it all the time. Nurses need to do it. Paramedics need to do it all the time. No problem. But a Kohen is not supposed to. Why? I think the answer is pretty apparent, but let's say it anyway. Actually, the Torah is going to tell us explicitly why. So let's move on, okay? So Kohen is not to come in contact with a dead body, literally. Okay, so any person, for anyone in his nation, he should not become impure. But we're going to see the context means any dead person in his nation. Okay, among his people. Except for his nearest of kin, the flesh that is near to him. We saw this word she'aro a lot in Leviticus chapter 18, or a number of times in Leviticus 18, when it's saying don't come to your near kin. In other words, speaking about incest. The se'ero karov, so that same phrase is being used here to say that the Kohen should not become impure except for his very nearest of kin, essentially his immediate family. Okay, the se'ero karov elav, for the flesh that is near to him, in other words, his nearest of kin, near kin. Le'imo le'imo le'aviv, for his mother and his father. Ulivno u'levito u'le'achiu, and for his son, his daughter, and his brother. So basically, his immediate family. A Kohen can enter a state of ritual impurity for his immediate family. In other words, he can carry the body, he can go to a funeral, he can whatever needs to be done, or whatever circumstances may take him in close contact with that dead body. He cannot do so for just a regular person from another, I won't say regular, but another person from among Israel, or from among the world for that matter. But he can for his immediate family, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, and his siblings. It says his brothers, but it just means his siblings in general. Okay? So we see here, what I see here is the kindness of the Torah. Okay? Because the Kohen has to be super careful not to enter a state of ritual impurity, not to get the kudis, because the Kohen is the one who's in close contact with the Mikdash. The Kohen is in close contact with the sanctuary, with the temple. And we know that it's super bad. That's a really bad thing to be in a state of ritual impurity when you come in contact with the holy areas, with the holy things. Okay, meaning within the courtyard of the tabernacle / temple, within foods that have been set aside, set aside for Yahweh. Okay, you could not be in a state, you cannot have the kudis, because these are special things in God's province. You cannot have the kudis when you approach Yahweh, when you approach God. Okay, and the Kohen, being the one who's in service of Yahweh, being the one who's serving in the tabernacle / temple, has to be super careful. So he is required essentially to avoid as much as possible ever entering a state of ritual impurity, even if he's outside the province of the temple, because maybe he's now going to have that state of ritual impurity and go back into the holy areas of the temple, which is his area of service, which is his specialty, which is his bailiwick, right? His province, and he may carry those kudis. He may carry that ritual impurity back into the holy areas, into the temple area. Okay, that's the situation. But the Torah realizes that it's not fair to ask of such things in the case of his immediate family, his mother, his father, his sister, his mother, his father, sister, brother, son, and daughter. That the Kohen, that this takes precedence, that he should be able to properly mourn and take care of the dead body of dead bodies of his immediate family if he needs to. I see this as an amazing kindness on the part of the Torah, an amazing realization of the sensitivities and how important it would be to do so for immediate family members. Okay, let's go on to the next verse. Verse 3. I'm sorry, so achiv in this context literally means his brother, not his sister, because now it goes on. So I take it back, doesn't mean sibling, it specifically means brother, his male sibling. Akrova elau asher lo tal ish la yitamo. So, and for his virgin sister, who is near to him, akrova elau. And that doesn't mean they're just good friends. What it essentially means is she's still living in the father's household, because that's the way unmarried women, and I guess men also, but especially unmarried women, until they got married, they lived in their father's household. Okay, asher lo etale ish, who had never lo etale ish, who had never been with a man, la itama. So for her, he may become impure. So this is an interesting distinction. We get into a whole topic that would take if we get into it, take a long time to get out of. But essentially, what it shows is that a woman is part of the household that she belongs to. We've spoken about this before. I don't want to get into it right now. Maybe next week. I think maybe I'm going to end actually after another verse or two. Maybe we'll talk about this next week. We spoke about this in the context of Ruth, that Ruth essentially does not become an Israelite until Boaz marries her. Why? Well, she was an Israelite. She was married to Machlon. She was married to the son of Machlon, who was the son of Naomi, right? Machlon was an Israelite. They happened to go to Moab. I'm sorry. Yes, right? They happened to go to Moab, but Machlon was an Israelite. So why isn't Ruth already an Israelite? Why does she have to, in Ruth chapter 2, verse 16, if I'm quoting it correctly, why does she have to essentially state her intention? Okay, your people are my people, your God is my people. Where you go, I shall go, and where you shall die, there I shall die. Okay, and so why does Ruth even have to state her intention to be part of Israel? Isn't she already part of Israel because she was married to Machlon? She was the wife of Machlon. Answer: no, they didn't have children. And we see a number of laws like this. This is not even talking about having children. This is talking about a woman who's never been married, that until a woman is married and has children, she doesn't acquire the status of her husband. She still has the status of either indeterminate status or the status of her father. And that's what we see here in this case. So the woman is already married, okay, and her husband has already had relations with her. Then her brother can no longer defile himself for her, because she's no longer, once she's married to a man, she's no longer really part of her father's household anymore. She's now part of her husband's household. So this is one of the verses, and there are others like it, that show that a woman takes on the status of the household that she belongs to. Before she's married, when she's a virgin growing up, she has a status of her father's household. And after she's married, she takes on the status of her husband's household. And we see this very clearly here. So a brother or a person can, Kohen can enter a state of ritual impurity, can allow himself to get the cooties, to be close to the body of his deceased sister, if she's still part of the father's household. If she has not been married to another man, now she's out of the household, and it's almost like she's not really his sister, first and foremost, anymore. She's her husband's wife, or she was her husband's wife. Okay, we'll do one more verse, and I think we're going to end. Verse 4. Okay, let's get this is a kind of a difficult verse to translate, so let's get a translation on it. So this is an interesting translation. You're going to get nobody really knows what this verse is exactly trying to say, and therefore, as I say a lot of times when we do these studies, one of the ways that you can tell if nobody is sure what the Hebrew verse is saying is if you look at various English translations and they're all different. I don't mean a word or two is different, that the meaning is a bit different. So let's look at, let's take the couple of translations here. We're going to go to, what do I go to? Parallel, is it? I think it's parallel. Oops. Let's try it again. Parallel. And we're going to Leviticus 21:4, and then we're going to end. After this, we're going to end. So Leviticus 21:4. Okay. He must not, so the NIV says he must not make himself unclean for people related to him by marriage and so defile himself. NLV, also by marriage. He shall not make himself unclean as a husband among his people and so profane himself. He's not to defile himself for those related to him by marriage. Okay, so we are getting some consistency here. Okay, I'm a bit surprised. But he shall not defile himself being a chief man among his people to profane himself. There we go. Right? Again, getting back to how Robert Alter translates it, he shall not be defiled among his kin to profane himself. So this is maybe related kind of the KJV, but he shall not defile himself being a chief man among his people to profane himself. So we're getting two different interpretations. So the word Baal literally means master, owner, like master in the sense, owner in the sense of master, like the owner or the master of a slave, but it also means husband. Okay, it's a famous verse in the book of Hosea. You'll no longer call, is it Hosea? I better not say something that's wrong. Yeah, Hosea. You shall no longer call me my master, but my man. Okay, and is that Hosea? I'm having a brain block right now. It doesn't matter. At any rate, so Baal could mean here husband, or it could just mean important person. And it's not really clear. This verse is a very difficult verse to interpret. I wonder if Robert Alter has anything to say about it. This is verse 4. I guarantee he's going to call it a crux. That's what he likes to do when something is not, when it's not clear really what it's saying. Let's see. There we go, crux. He always does that. When he always uses that same word. And crux means, unknown or indeterminate. Like the two Hebrew words Baal, Be'amal, or the two Hebrew words Baal Be'amal are well-known crux. Literally, they mean a master or husband among his kin. The various attempts to make this intelligible are strained, and it has been pointed out by several scholars that elsewhere Baal is always used either as part of a collection, Hebrew smichut, we won't get into that right now, or in a declined form. This translation adopts Meir Paran's plausible proposal that the received text reflects a deuterography, the initial bet and ayin of Be'amal inadvertently repeated by a scribe, and then a lamed added in order to turn the two letters into a known word. So we could talk about that next week. We'll end up here. That's an interesting. So he's basically, one second. So he's basically saying it's a scribal error. He's saying that these two letters, Ba'a and Ba'a, are repeated, and it's a very interesting idea. We're going to talk about it next week. I think we're going to end here, and we'll start, I guess we'll start right at the beginning of Leviticus 21 next time, more or less. But we're going to end here, okay? We've been going at it for what? Almost 3 hours. It's late here in Israel. It's already 8:30, and I think I want to grab a little bite to eat and start winding down for the evening. So we're going to stop the Torah study here. And I hope you enjoyed it. I think it was a very interesting Torah study, if I may say so myself. They always are, not because of me, but because of the Torah. And it's just amazing to be able to explore and learn. You know, I may officially be here the quote unquote teacher, but I can assure you I learn about a million, but many, many new things each Torah study. And that's one of the things I love about doing these Torah studies. So let me thank everybody for joining us. Let's see, any announcements? Again, as I always say, we are now in the process of, or at least desiring to set up a Karaite community here in Katsrin. So if you live in the land of Israel and you want to be part of an actual live Karaite community rather than an online internet community, consider to moving to Katsrin. It's an absolutely beautiful city. It's been quiet lately, thank God. A little bit more than it was before. It's a great city in terms of nature, in terms of things to do. It's a great city to raise kids. If you have young children or older children, it's just a great place to be. So let's start getting our first World Alliance of Qara'im community set up here in Katsrin. So come one, come all. And yeah, let's do it. The other thing I want to point out is the newspaper that I've published since 1997, Your Jerusalem. So I used to do it full time back in the late 90s, but I moved on to other things. But I still do it kind of as a side thing. I don't make any money off of it. It's a labor of love. And so whenever I have time, I publish new articles. And we published a new article recently, so go check it out. It's yourjerusalem.org, single word, Your Jerusalem, no spaces, no dots, no nothing. Your Jerusalem only dot is there, yourjerusalem.org. As an American, can I join the Army of Israel? I believe you can. As a matter of fact, if you're talking about the IDF, I believe there are programs for non-citizens, even non-Jews, to come and join the IDF in one capacity or another. I don't know all the details, but you should look into it. Maybe you want to contact Anthony. Maybe you want to contact, I don't know if they're the right organization to contact. Maybe Google it online. I'm not a citizen of Israel, but I want to volunteer for the IDF, or I want to be part of the IDF. I don't know all the details. And so check out yourjerusalem.org. That's Your Jerusalem newspaper. And please get the word out about these studies. Apparently, if you share and like and subscribe and all these kind of things, the YouTube videos and on Facebook, it gets the word out more. So let's please do that. And that's all I got. So thank you all for joining us this week on the World Alliance of Qara'im Torah study. And we're going to end it here. I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov wherever you are in the world. Hope you have a great week and a great Shabbat if you're still celebrating Shabbat. And we'll go out with some music as usual. And we will pick it up again. Be'ezrat Yahweh, we'll pick it up again next week. Thanks for joining us. And Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.
עיניי אל הערים, מאין יבוא עזרי? עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיני אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. אוי 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 אוי, שיר למעלות, אשא עיני אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. אוי 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 אוי, שיר למעלות.